join us on the Dog Central YouTube channel or wherever else you would like to. So hope we see you somewhere. And I know we have our Dog Central subscribers that will be asking some questions as well. Lots going on in the UGA world, in the college football world. I think probably a good place to kind of start would be recapping Georgia's transfer portal season. Probably, obviously, the biggest kind of piece of news in terms of outgoing guys has been A.D. Mitchell, obviously hitting the portal last week, heading out to Texas. Not super shocking. If you know, we talked about this back in December. I think the week after the SEC championship game, we started talking about this on Dog Central, that there was a chance he would leave. Don't want to get into all the kind of details, he said, she said, of that situation. But I do think, you know, it's kind of an interesting thing to have happened when you couple it with the Ra Thomas news of this morning. Obviously, we don't have all of the information there yet. We don't really know what has gone on. But, you know, kind of you put all of it together, and much like going into the last couple of seasons, Georgia's back into having an ex-receiver question mark, I guess. I wouldn't call it an issue. I think that, you know, Georgia is but you definitely do have guys in here that, you know, are going to be capable of playing and have played in big moments in their careers, and, you know, are proven commodities. Again, we don't know what's going to happen with Ra Thomas. I think trying to speculate on that would be a waste of time. But I don't know. I'd love to get Josh to weigh in here. Josh is obviously co-hosting with me tonight, aka Dog Stats. He wrote a really interesting article over the weekend about returning production, guys with 60 plus PFF grades and in the 60th plus percentile of snaps taken at their position in the country. So, Josh, curious to hear your kind of perception on UGA's receiver room.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting to see that not only what Lovett and Ra brought to us in terms of experience, but their quality of experience. And that's kind of what I'm going through, is trying to beat everybody to the returning production, and where you just see percentages of defense, percentage of offense coming in, and actually talk about the quality of what's returning in terms of, and putting numbers associated with that as opposed to just percentages and stuff. And certainly Lovett and Brock Bowers make up the two players on a roster that have 80 plus PFF grades, which basically, as you think about PFF grades, 60 grades are considered quality and not just above replacement player starters, if you will. And then 70 gets you to sort of that elite status, and then 80 is sort of NFL pro quality talent there. So Lovett's year from last year and Brock Bowers, I think certainly in the SEC, were the only two that had as many targets, 60% of the targets for wide receivers and tight ends in the country, and that 80 PFF grade. Ra Thomas was like a 67, but he had a lot of snaps, and I believe, Graham, I lost my spreadsheet, but I believe a lot of those were at the wide position. So okay. So he, and we're not going to talk about the case in terms of what's going on there. There's a lot to be told, but certainly right now as it stands, I don't think you can necessarily pencil in Rara as a player this year for Georgia. So with that, it definitely is going to take a hit. We were leading the SEC in returning receptions and targets, near the top of the league in returning passing or receiving yards. So they're going to have to figure out that, which they will. But yeah. So yes, but if you check that out on dogcentral.com, you can see I posted sort of the number of players that came in or returning this year with 60% of percentile snaps and 60 plus PFF grades. But if you go to the forum, you can actually see the SEC breakdown of who's coming back and the skill and all those positions. No, I think I just did the skill. I think I did running back and wide receiver. So I'm going to update with the offensive line and defensive players this week as well.
Yeah, for sure. I'm curious, kind of looking at the receiving room, I am wondering, is there, I don't know, you've kind of looked at some of these comparisons of returning production so far, and obviously we have another transfer portal cycle ahead of us after spring practice, so all of this is subject to change, so to speak. But like, where do you feel like, just from a pure kind of numbers stats standpoint, Georgia falls in terms of returning receiving production? Because that's historically been a marker for teams being successful. The higher percentage of returning receiving production, usually the better.
I think we're looking pretty good, even if Rara is not available to play for Georgia this year. You've got Brock Bowers, who had 82 targets and a PFF. Actually, Brock had a 90 PFF grade, 942 yards, 7 touchdowns. Dominic Lovett comes to Georgia from Missouri, 76 targets and a PFF grade of 83 with 800 yards. And then the next guy that falls there, you got Rosemary Jackson, who still had had 43 targets. But if you look at the rest of the league, Antoine Wells returns for South Carolina at 92 targets, but the next leader is 46. Neighbors certainly is one of the best in the SEC returning, but he's got 100 targets. But you look behind him, there's not a lot there. And then, Arkansas is really, really, not that we're really worried about Arkansas, if I can be that way, but, certainly Alabama is going to have to find some folks to step up this year. And Tennessee has been really ravaged in terms of their attrition this year. So if you're asking me how I feel about the returning production at receiver position, quite good, because I think everyone is going to be, I think Georgia's ahead of everybody, even if Thomas can't, ends up not being part of the team this year.
Yeah, it's interesting to look at because, Dominic Lovett was the SEC's leading receiver in the regular season, if I'm not mistaken. And, from I always look at this yards per route run stat that PFF does a really good job with. And if you're talking small sample sizes, throw it out. But for guys who, are starters on their teams and play a ton of snaps. Dominic Lovett had almost 300 receiving snaps this year, which is a ton, especially considering he only played, I believe, in 12 games. He had I've always looked at the yards per route run as 2.00 yards a route run is usually your kind of benchmark for elite to high level receiver play. Dominic Lovett with Brady Cook throwing to him, keep that in mind. 2.94 yards per route run in 2022, which is a very high, almost kind of insanely good number. When you look at Georgia's roster this past year, Arian Smith, you can't really count, but nobody that played full time, played in every game basically as a wide receiver or played, 150 plus receiving snaps was anywhere close to that 3.0 yards per route run. Brock Bowers is 2.37 yards a route run, to kind of put that in perspective for you guys. McConkey, 2.16. Interestingly enough, A.D. Mitchell, 1.56 in 2022. In 2021, which again, that's a small sample size in 2022. He only played in 3 games, but in 2021, 1.66. So he, obviously like a very talented receiver, but losing him is more, I think, losing like a guy that is talented, but he only played in a few games for Georgia last year. Like, you're not talking about losing a guy who the offense ran through last season. I just think it's interesting, like, in all of this conversation about who or what is going to be on the roster next season, I think probably variable is Georgia keeping Todd Monken, because Georgia, lost George Pickens before the 2021 season, went on to win a national championship. They lose AD Mitchell for, I think, 11 games in 2022 and go on to win a national championship. Obviously, Rosemy, we talked about earlier, like a very, very solid wide receiver, really good at like deep crossing routes, but not a guy who is graded out really superbly over his career, or especially since the injury against man coverage. Like, he's not somebody that's going to burn a defense. He's really savvy, I think, at finding holes in zone coverage and finding spots to sit down. But I guess, long story short, I would agree with you. I think Georgia has options, and we've seen Todd Monken kind of scheme around this would be a good spot to maybe transition. And Deuce Robinson, but looks like kind of situation is
You want that X receiver, and it's like people. That's definitely a position.
last couple of years in terms of, people either really, really liked him or, sometimes felt like maybe he was holding things back at that position. But after what George has done the last couple of years, like I think you can almost say with a level of certainty that like every guy that's going to come next at quarterback at UGA is going to be stud, a 4 or 5 star, with all the physical tools and physical gifts. But Raiola is a guy like we're like we all get in the habit of getting excited about recruits because recruits they always represent like pure potential, right? And they always kind of I don't know, like they're still the unknown, and so you never know what they're going to be. But part of that not knowing what they're going to be allows for I think some excitement from a lot of people. But I say all that to say this: like Raiola is a dude among dudes. Like he is maybe the best quarterback prospect we've seen in high school since like Trevor Lawrence. I don't like. I think that's definitely a fair statement, if not an accurate one. So you see him starting to trend towards Georgia a little bit, and when he decommitted from Ohio State, there was a lot of speculation around is he going to go to Nebraska where his uncle is the offensive line coach, I believe, or what's he going to do? And right now it looks like it's kind of Georgia and USC, but it feels like Georgia has a pretty I don't want to say they have like a lead, but it feels like maybe they have a leg up right now, or things are trending his way. He's been very active posting UGA related things on social media, which, that doesn't necessarily mean anything, but like all the intel there is positive right now. And I think he is one of those recruits, much like kind of Arch Manning was for Texas, that if he pops and ends up committing to Georgia, which I don't have any intel on when he's going to commit, but if he does, you're talking about like potentially historic levels of skill talent that are going to follow him. And I think it's very interesting. Just Stetson became Georgia's first ever 4,000-yard passer last season. I know that Georgia wasn't throwing the ball a lot in the fourth quarter of most of their games because of the leads they have, but like I think they erased a lot of the kind of previous like recruiting narratives around UGA being a place that doesn't develop or necessarily use wide receiver talent. And I think that offense that Georgia put on the field and put on tape this year is the reason why a guy like Raiola is now interested. Yeah, I mean, I think it's one to watch because it's as far as off-season storylines go, talking about, I know some people are like, I don't follow recruiting. I'll keep up with these kids when they get on campus. But like, this is one of those where if he commits to Georgia, it does have a very significant ripple effect. And it's one to watch, even if you're not necessarily like a recruit, Nick. Because I think he's, if he signs, he's automatically the most talented quarterback to come through Athens since Matthew Stafford. And you're talking about a lot of wide receiving talent that is going to come with him. I've heard like, I believe who is the 2024 wide receiver? 2024. Bear with me for a second, guys. I believe it's the number one ranked wide receiver in the 2024 class. Kid that is currently Jeremiah Smith. Yeah. Currently committed to Ohio State. He's a 5-star, 6'3", 185 pounds, out of Opelika, Florida. Like, if Raiola commits to Georgia, then I think Georgia gets Jeremiah Smith on campus for a visit, right? And so, like, those are the type of things that may start happening. Also in that 2024 recruiting class is Ellis Robinson, the fourth. He's out of IMG Academy. He's a really sharp kid. We got to interview him on 100 Sanford last year. He set a commitment date of February 1st today. I expect him to go to Georgia. I would be very surprised if he doesn't. But you start going down the 2024 class, and you have Raiola on the board there, the number 1 overall player, but like the number 2 player in the class is KJ Bolden, Georgia product. Number 6, Sammy Brown, Georgia product. Number 7, Mike Matthews, Georgia product. Number 8, Ellis Robinson, soon to be Georgia commit, more than likely. The 2024 recruiting class in the state of Georgia is, I think, as good as we've ever seen. You've got Landon Thomas already committed. He's a tight end. He's the number 22 player in the class right now. King Joseph Edwards was on campus for that, for the national title celebration. He's 6'5", 242. I would imagine. I think he probably projects as an edge for UGA, but like top 25 player in his class. Like the amount of in-state guys that you're looking at Georgia chasing already that are top 50, top 100 players. I don't know that there's ever been more in the state, and I think just the way the tea leaves look right now, that Georgia is probably lining up for like, I think that this 2024 class that Georgia puts together might make a run at the class that Texas A&M had a couple of years ago that was the highest rated ever. So if you don't follow recruiting, now would be probably a fun time to start doing it, just because if winning one national title didn't already have Georgia rolling on the trail. And to be clear, like Georgia recruiting really, really well is what created these back-to-back national titles to start with. But it's going to get, I think, even scarier for UGA over the next couple of recruiting cycles. Josh, do we have any questions or comments or any thoughts from you or anything like that?
Well, Steve dropped in the I don't know, the comments of the space. Did you see that Juice Robinson is being visited by one Lincoln Riley?
That doesn't surprise me. I mean, he's definitely, yeah. I mean, USC is definitely still in that recruitment. And I like. I mean, he's an Arizona product, right? Like, it's not too far to get from LA to Phoenix. I still think Georgia has the edge there, and I think it's good. Riley being in home tonight with him or this week makes getting Deuce on campus this weekend even more significant, in my opinion. But yeah, I should always add the caveat that like A, we're talking about teenagers, and B, now that there's the NIL equation of college football recruiting, like just any of these can turn on a dime. Nothing is done until the names are on the dotted line. But I still just from what I've heard, from what Jason has heard, Jason's our kind of recruiting expert over at dogcentral.com. Like I still feel very good about where Georgia is in it.
At the end of the day, we can't get them all. It's like,
right.
I mean, we where we came from 2015 and 2016 is just remarkable. So give me all the tight ends, but I mean, like, come on. Paul jumped into the YouTube chat and he's asking about Dan Jackson, David Daniels, and just what are your thoughts on those guys' roles in the secondary next year?
Yeah, I'm definitely.
I know you and Craig are going through some defensive stuff that's going to drop this week too. So this is kind of a good segue into that.
For sure, yeah. Craig Lawson and I have been working on a little joint article to post. It'll be a free post on Dog Central for you guys this week, kind of a projected defensive depth chart going into spring practice. I think when you look at Georgia's 2023 roster on defense, probably the biggest question is, is that safety spot opposite of Starks? Like you get Lassiter back, you get Bullard back. You are going to have another boundary corner step up, but like you've got so much talent stacked in that room that you almost wish you had more open spots to play guys. I don't have, spring is going to be interesting because like Dan Jackson definitely has the experience and is relevant to mention that like he has beat out David Daniel before, for playing time. And I mean, he was at least good enough to be on the field in a lot of situations this year before he broke that foot. Like he was out there in certain packages when Georgia was going 6 DBs and Malachi Starks is just a freak of nature. So losing your spot to him is not really a poor reflection on, anyone as a player. But I do think, right now, David Daniel is a guy that you love the way he plays the run. I think you saw him grow up a lot this year and you watched him kind of reach a higher level of understanding with coverage schemes. There was the play at the end of the South Carolina game when Georgia gave up the touchdown where he kind of got fooled on a play action and bit down too hard and they threw the ball over his head. And you used to see him kind of come into games and have some of those plays. And then, you fast forward and he was on the field for some pretty important moments against Ohio State in the second half of that game. Like, he did some really good things and was on the field against some good teams and definitely was not exposed as a liability. I don't know that his upside as a coverage player is quite as high as some of the other guys on the roster. You have Corey Thomas, who was, a 4-star in last year's class and was on the field, saw him in the national title game in the second half. Like, he seemed to kind of be the next in line when Georgia would fully rotate out Smith and Starks last year. You kind of, you tended to see Thomas and David Daniel come in. So I wouldn't be shocked to see him at least compete for that position. I also would say watch out for Julian Humphrey. That's a guy that a lot of people thought might transfer. We reported on Dog Central that like I think he kind of grew up a lot this season. Maybe didn't come in and it's hard to adjust to college, right? Especially when you have a 40-hour-a-week job called playing football. And I think maybe that learning curve for him was a little steeper at first than for some other freshmen, but like he caught up quick and he assimilated really well into Georgia's culture, and I think took a lot of like responsibility and understanding and started doing things the Georgia way, so to speak. And he's still there, and he's a guy that I've had sources tell me Georgia's staff thinks he's talented enough to play significant snaps on that defense next year. So that would be kind of the X factor that I would say to keep an eye on. And you obviously have Smoke Bowie that just came in as well. I think there's a lot of people that think he might challenge for that safety spot. So like every position at battle at UGA right now, at least it feels like, there's a ton of talented guys that are going to battle it out. I think it's also important to keep in mind the way that Georgia played and the way they open the season next year with, kind of 4 pretty simple games. I think you're going to probably see multiple guys thrown into the field with the first team in that safety role opposite of Starks, and you're just going to probably evaluate them in game, but we'll definitely keep you guys updated on the position battle and what we hear coming out of spring practice. Josh, I am curious if you have any thoughts or takes on the transfer of Tresman Marshall, either from a returning production standpoint or, you kind of mentioned back in 2015, 2016, that era, like I remember being at the 2015 Georgia-Alabama game and walking down at field level before kickoff and realizing that Georgia was about to get, thrown out of the building, so to speak, just looking at the the difference in size and on the line of scrimmage. But like Mo Smith came to Athens in 2016, right? Was a reserve for Alabama and immediately became one of the best, 2 or 3 defenders on that Georgia roster. Like, are we starting to see that paradigm shift a little bit with, Georgia
reserves, maybe, going off to not just Nebraska or Miami or, some of these other P5 schools that are a tier or two below where UGA has been. But like, is this now happening at Alabama or is that, maybe making too much out of one thing?
First off, it's talking season again, so I think we can make as much out of stuff like this as we want.
We need content.
Well, and it is definitely, I don't know. I mean, clearly, Alabama and Georgia and Ohio State are all at the top of the elite teams for sure. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you that where we were as a team and personnel wise in 2017 is where Alabama is, because they're not. But it is interesting to see that that we've got guys that can't get on the field, and they're finding spots in Alabama. It's if you can't be proud of that as a Georgia fan, then I'm sorry, you should be proud of that. Honestly, it's like, and I mean, I'm not gonna sit here and tell you I'm cheering for the kid, but I don't want anything bad to happen to him. But yeah, he chose Alabama over us.
Sure.
So yeah, it's like, all right, let's go kick their ass, and but yeah, I definitely think that is significant point to this narrative of where Georgia is and what Kirby has done in terms of talent and retention. He's getting the guys that he's making the right calls on guys he needs to play and to keep on the field. And some of the guys go out in attrition, and Marshall is one of those kids that he may find better. It may be better for him over there, and I don't think we were going to miss him. You don't want to see anybody go that can play in the SEC at that level, but you can only, like I said, you can't have all the players.
But well, I mean, Marshall, I think, is a good player, right? Like, we saw him do plenty of good things for Georgia this year, but he also was, fourth on UGA's list of inside linebackers in terms of snaps taken. And if I'm not mistaken, I think he was tied for 18th on the team in terms of snaps played on defense. So like, you're talking a guy that, is a very much a reserve player. I do think he is a very good cover backer. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say he had 170 snaps, did have a PFF grade of 67. So yeah, that's quality stuff, but yeah, not we'll be able to fill in. I mean, linebacker is deep too. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just
no, you're totally fine.
I finally pulled his stat out, so I wanted to at least use them.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah, I just think like Georgia just assigned 3 of the top 5 inside linebacker recruits in the 2023 cycle, and you already heard Kirby Smart like shouting those guys out for how they ran TCU's 3-3-5 in the lead up to the national championship game. He was talking about CJ Allen, and what's really interesting, like I think Marshall's role on that defense was, if Georgia came up against a running back or a tight end that was particularly problematic in coverage for, don't get me wrong, Mondin is obviously a freakish athlete who does plenty of good things in coverage as well. But I thought, Marshall was kind of that guy that, like, if Georgia had to face a Kenny McIntosh type on the other side of the field or a James Cook type on the other side of the field, like, Marshall was the dude that could come in and match up with them, and you wouldn't have to take Mondin out of the middle of the field because he did so many things well in terms of stopping the run and spying on quarterbacks and delayed blitzes and zone coverage. But you just signed Troy Bowles, right? Which, like, if you go and, flip on the tape of him, like, that kid has so many clips on his high school film where he is 20, 30 yards downfield, and he's like not just in coverage and doing a really good job and flipping his hips and playing the ball like a defensive back, but like there's times where he literally baits high school quarterbacks into throwing him pick sixes as a linebacker, which is silly. But point being, like, I get why Alabama brought him in, because what's been the weakness of that defense for the last few years? I mean, there's been a couple, but like a big one was, you could abuse toe in the passing game if you got, a running back matched up on him that was good receiving the ball out of the backfield. And so I get why they'd want him, but it is a little wild to see, a guy who probably was maybe going to get, less snaps next year than he got this year because of the talent coming in. And, Alabama needs him or wants him. I highly doubt he went there with, without some assurances of like, you're likely to see more playing time. Other kind of transfer portal, NFL type stuff. I'm curious, Josh, are you going to adopt the Nebraska Cornhuskers as your Big Ten team of choice this season?
Absolutely not. Before we jump to that, because it is a good topic, and Harry's bringing it up in the chat, Alabama looks to be to be returning the fewest defensive snaps in the SEC. So
wow.
It's definitely, they've got a lot of guys they're gonna have to fill in. So the fact that you're replacing that many, it is, Marshall's definitely a great asset for them, with experience and that's with Marshall's. Well, I mean, 170 snaps is not that much, but yeah. So I'm not surprised to see you might see some more guys, especially after the spring portal, maybe come in and try to contribute for Alabama. So yeah, okay. So it's Gilbert, and tell me the other two. Just totally brain farted on who went to Nebraska.
Eric Gilbert, Jacob Hood, who was kind of more of a developmental offensive line prospect that Georgia signed. He's only been on campus, I think, for a year, but he's like a 6'8", 350-pound kid out of Memphis, 3-star offensive lineman. And MJ Sherman, who's been on the team forever, but never really was back the lineup.
I'll say a little bold prediction that those guys, at least MJ, I don't know. I hope Gilbert gets on the field. I really do. But you can't really count that. But I can see MJ becoming a key contributor, and it'll be very interesting to see a guy that didn't necessarily find as much playing time as he wanted to see what he can do on a mid Big Ten team against other mid Big Ten teams, and see if he can ball out. I kind of see that. I can see that happening for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think you definitely wish those guys success, and it is just that, like, a couple years ago, Miami pulled Tyreek Stevenson out of the portal, and Florida State pulled Jermaine Johnson out of the portal, and both those guys showed up at their new schools and were immediately the best players on those defenses. And so I do think it's indicative of what Georgia's doing, and I think it's also interesting. So far Georgia's only taken 2 guys out of the portal. We obviously, as we mentioned as we opened the show, we don't know what's going to happen with Ra Thomas. He may not ever play a snap or officially practice with Georgia. We'll see. I don't know. But like, it says a lot about, I think, how good they feel about this 2023 roster, that they identified maybe one area of need at wide receiver and looked across the rest of the roster and said, I think we're good. Like, I don't think I saw Georgia offer a defensive player in the portal. And I don't think I saw them offer anybody that wasn't a wide receiver in the portal at all. So I think if you want to compete for national titles in this day and age, you probably don't want to be taking 8 to 10 guys out of the portal every year. Maybe lightning strikes and everything falls your way and you do end up competing for a national title. But if you're trying to, turn over what basically amounts to a third, maybe 40, 45%, 40% or so of a usual 25-man recruiting class in the portal every year, then either your evaluation is wrong or your recruiting is not good enough.
Let's see here. I think we're caught up in the YouTube questions. Anybody have any questions in the spaces? We're trying to do this so that people on YouTube and Twitter can get in here. So if you've got any questions, there is a request. You want to take it? It is Tyler Williams. You want to?
Yes. Sure. 1 second.
I got him. Tyler.
You got him.
I think so. Tyler, he is connecting as we wait for Tyler. Anybody else?
Hey,
Tyler,
can y'all hear me?
Welcome.
Yes, sir.
Sorry about that. So I don't know if y'all already touched on this, but this is something that's been on my mind. How much of a nightmare scenario is it if Gunnar Stockton balls out in spring practice and plays really well on G-Day? I know Kirby and them aren't going to name a starter after spring practice, but I'm sure the team's going to know what's going on.
Yeah. I don't know that it's a nightmare scenario. I mean, I think he's a guy that the staff really likes. Like we heard all year, you know, Stockton prepares like a starter. You know, I had a couple updates on the Dog Central subscriber forum at different points where, you know, guys were saying like he probably watches more film than anybody on offense than Brock Bowers. So, I mean, if you have a kid with that kind of pedigree, that kind of 4 or 5 star pedigree that is mature like that, then I don't know that it's necessarily a bad thing.
Even for the depth chart, I would imagine Vandegrift and Beck are probably going to be looking at where they're at. And I would imagine if Gunnar Stockton is looking like the starter, it'd be hard to think that they're going to stay, right?
I would think, you know, maybe if one of those two guys, which I think it's much more likely to be Vandegrift than Beck, you know, let's say Vandegrift feels after spring that he's, you know, solid third in that race, I wouldn't be shocked to see him hit the portal. I've actually heard, you know, some people connect him with Wake Forest potentially. Like if things don't work out for him this spring, maybe he goes and takes over Sam Hartman's old spot. Again, that's purely speculative, but yeah, I think, you know, you don't want to be back where you were in 2019, where you've got 2 scholarship quarterbacks like you did Fromm's final year, but you know, there is another transfer portal cycle after spring. I think Georgia really wants one of those guys, one of those 3 of Vandegrift, Beck, and Stockton to step up and grab the reins and act like a starter and look like a starter and play like a starter, because you are handing these quarterbacks like the keys to a Ferrari, right? Like the receiving room is stacked. The tight end room is stacked. You're going to have Amarius Mims protecting your blind side. Like your defense is not going to go out and give up much to, you know, more than a couple teams maybe in college football. So yes, like you got to have. So I think maybe for Georgia right now at quarterback, like the intangible stuff, you know, the off field showing up consistently with the right attitude and, you know, holding your teammates accountable and knowing the playbook. Like I think that stuff is probably going to be more important in determining this whole quarterback battle than the, you know, who's got the biggest arm and, you know, who can maybe, you know, make all the throws. Cause I think, you know, Beck's got a cannon. He can make the throws. Vandegrift, we know he's got legs. We know he's got a big arm. I don't think his accuracy has been there, you know, at least in practice to this point in his career, but maybe that flip or that switch flips for him. And then Stockton, I think, is like kind of, you know, the one where from an intangible standpoint, I think like he kind of showed up on campus and immediately started acting like you want your college quarterback to act. But, you know, does he know the offense? Does he have as big of an arm as those other 2 guys, et cetera, et cetera? So there's going to be a lot of dynamics at play.
I think there's going to be a lot of intel drops in the Dog Central forum about our quarterback situation coming through.
Well, yeah, I do. I have been told already that you know, both Beck and Vandegrift like have, you know, kind of, I don't know, just seem locked in, you know, or sort of in that like mentality of head down, focused, you know, taking extra reps in the weight room, that kind of thing.
Thank you, Tyler. Thanks for bringing up the quarterbacks. We couldn't do a space without it. Good question. Yeah. Just before we get to CS, who's queued up, it's coming on the spaces, Anna. McCarthy in the YouTube did point out that we talked about Smoke Bowie, but we did take Smoke Bowie on defense as a transfer just on
That's
that.
true.
So
You're correct.
Good call, Anna. And here comes CS. And I'm gonna how do I unmute him?
Yeah,
there we go.
You hear me?
Awesome. Thank you, man.
Yeah, what's up, man?
What you got?
Yeah, not really worried about the quarterback situation. The weapons and Monken will take care of that, in my opinion. My one hole that I see on the roster right now is not the ability to replace what Kenny Mack and before him James Cook did in the passing game. Any chance we dip in the portal there?
That's an interesting one. I think what's interesting is to go back and watch the tape of the national championship game and see how Dejan Edwards was used in the passing game against TCU, because they checked the ball down to him a lot. Like they did some interesting things. I don't think he's, Kenny Mack used to line up in the slot, but I mean, like that touchdown play that Georgia had on the throw to McConkey where he was wide open, like Dejan was lined up in a bunch set as a wide receiver and came in motion. Like he was lined up as a receiver at times in that game, which is just, I don't know, something to note, I think, because we hadn't seen that to this point in his career. So I don't know. I'd always heard he's underrated catching the ball. He's definitely like shifty. I mean, Kendall Milton is not going to, cut on a dime on an angle route and shake a linebacker out of his shoes. More like maybe that happens against somebody, but he's not going to do that week by week. But like, he is good for, a wheel route or something. He can catch the ball, I guess I should say. But I don't see Georgia going in the portal at running back unless there's an injury or something that happens in the spring and one of those guys is going to be out, because I don't know. We don't know what Branson and Andrew Paul can do from a receiving standpoint, but I would be surprised if they went in the portal for a running back.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. Sure. Thanks for jumping in. Look at that pro spacer right there. Jumped in, mutes, get this back out.
Josh, do you have any insight from any of your numbers on the, any of the halfback receiving stuff?
Yeah, when I was looking at the receiving stuff, and the running back positions, it was interesting to see how much Dejan played. I knew we saw him a lot and we loved what we saw, but it was interesting to see with the volume he got. So, and I remember talking him up in the preseason, so I shouldn't be surprised, but I don't see him, and maybe it's just, I'm not a X and O's guy, so I don't think he brings the same skill set that Cook did in 2021 and what McIntosh did last year. But, with a year of weight training and maybe he builds his body a little differently to get those snaps, because I think there is, like every spring, there's positions open, and if you want playing time, you've got to go earn those spots. So maybe Dejan can get that role. Maybe he can be seen out running in the slot, motioning out of the backfield and trying to create mismatches there. So,
yeah,
I don't see Branson doing that. And I don't know if Milton can, if he's, one of those guys is going to do it, because we've seen Monken. That offense is pretty electric when you've got that mismatch out there that can run between the tackles and also go get on a linebacker and go take one to the house for 70 yards. So, I was surprised to see how much actual volume that Dejan got and played very well when Milton was banged up in the middle part of the season.
Yeah, I mean, I do think if you just look at his receiving stats, I mean, he was only targeted 19 times. He did have 14 catches for 101 yards. But what is interesting is he was on the field this year for 148 plays where Georgia passed the ball. And of those 148 plays, he ran a passing route on 119 of them. So, point being, he's not being asked to stay in and pass protect a bunch. Is that a product of him maybe not being the greatest pass protector? I don't know. I'd have to go, dive down a little bit deeper wormhole of his tape. But, if he's on the field and a pass play is called, he's running a route over 80% of the time. And he did actually line up in the slot this year 16 times, which is,
Yep.
And he lined up out wide 11 times. So that means of those, 119 receiving snaps, about a little over 18% of those 119 involved him at the slot or out wide. So maybe there's more to it than I know, but there's a play in the TCU game where he was the check down, and I believe it was the second or third and 7 around midfield, and he came out of the backfield and ran kind of like a little bit of a short out. It wasn't a true out route. He didn't like cut 90 degrees to the sideline. It was almost like a short corner or an outside slant, but like he catches the ball in stride. He creates separation on the linebacker, which again, those TCU linebackers were kind of big and, they're not SEC linebackers is all I'm trying to say. But I don't know. I think he's got a little more juice as a pass catcher maybe than people realize.
Yeah, it was, like I said, that volume, 19 snaps or 19 targets is not insignificant for that guy. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him maybe change. I hope so. So he's been there in the program and it's solid and doesn't make a lot of mistakes, which you want to see.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really interested to see what Andrew Paul is. Hopefully we get a glimpse of him on G-Day, but like there was a time, last year where we were hearing that, he was looking like more likely to see snaps early in the season than Branson Robinson. And we know that Branson Robinson is an athletic freak. So it will be interesting, but it seems like Milton and Edwards are going to be kind of that, 1A, 1B in 2023. So something to watch for sure. Anybody else have questions? Do we have anything else that's jumped in the YouTube chat? Not that I see. Josh, do you have any other thoughts that you want to get in before we wrap this thing up?
No, I think we had a good talk and would love the interaction from YouTube and on the spaces. So we were going to try to do this more regularly. We always welcome feedback on how this is all working. We always appreciate you letting us know when stuff's not working and try to fix it on the day. So we did get our YouTube audio sorted out. So with that, maybe we'll just save it for another night if you're good with that, Graham. And we gave an hour's worth of stuff, so that ain't nothing.
No, it's not. Yeah, I mean, lastly, we want to really encourage you guys to check us out on dogcentral.com. We still are running our holiday special. You can get a year of Dog Central for $60. That's $5 a month. That's less points than Georgia scored against TCU in the national championship game. Come and check us out. I am about to post kind of my first intel update on things I'm hearing about the 2023 roster and some of the early enrollees. So hope you guys will join us there. Really enjoy doing this kind of format with you, Josh, and being able to talk to some of you guys live on air and also go out on YouTube. So I'm going to try and make sure we do this, once a week or so, maybe a little more often during spring practice if there's stuff to talk about. But thank you as always for watching and listening, and